Let me just start off by saying this season is on a back-to-back, like on some 97 Bulls, 04 Lakers type vibes, and I'm really enjoying it, man. Wow. What a directorial debut for Neil Druckmann, who's the creative director for the game, and what a tone setter. I mean, this is another episode where I actually felt like I was just playing the game. I love it. Whoa, you just gonna switch up the route like that? The title of this episode was called Infected, but really it could have passed for just Fear. The episode starts out on an already set up foundation, Jakarta. You might remember it from the previous episode where Joel, Tommy, and Sarah were listening to the radio and had heard this place come up speaking in reference to the infection. Now, one of the things I like about this episode is not only how real it seems by going globally, but actually getting that time spent discussing how dire the situation is. They had to kidnap a well-known mycology professor named Ibu Ratna, who's an original character for the show, but very necessary to show us just how serious the situation is. After she messed around and found out, she said, you know what? Everybody here gotta go. That means men, women, pets, kids, everybody, everything. And that is terrifying. It's also accurate to the game, so if you haven't played the game, welcome to The Last of Us. Speaking of fear though, infection is one thing, but what you become after? The fact that they not only got the design of the clickers and the runners right, but the mannerisms is just, it's amazing. Like, this is literally the video game come to life. One of the things that I liked most about the game is that feeling of having to survive, that survival mindset that I mentioned in the last playthrough episode. While we're on the topic of survival though, in the game, you'll hear Ellie repeat a phrase, endure and survive. And this episode does a really good job of showing how if they're gonna succeed, they'll need each other to endure and survive. The fact that Fedra is nowhere to be seen is perfect because it really shows how anything outside of the wall cannot be trusted. Everyone in present day has that type of mindset as well, because we pick up with Joel and Tess watching over Ellie with a loaded gun because she's infected, and it usually takes about a day or two before they turn, but there's no sign of it getting worse. That glass half empty Joel pops up and you know he has something negative to say. Anyways, a little bit later in the episode, while they were having a conversation on the highway on their way to the hotel, Ellie mentions different types of infected that she had heard about, like super infected that explode fungus spores on you, or ones with split open heads that see in the dark like bats. The first part could be referring to what's called a shambler, which is a variant of infected that's only seen in part 2. So more than likely she's setting up the bloater, which is a boss infected that you bump into while you're in Billstown, which is what the next episode is going to be based on. The ones with the split open heads though are the clickers, of course. Those are the stage 3 variants of the infected between the stalkers and the shamblers slash bloaters. The episode also explains that the fungus is sort of like a hive mind that grows by taking victims that don't live inside the QZ but may be looking for shelter. The fungus grows underground with huge mile-long roots, and since this show uses tendrils instead of spores, if you step on one of the tendrils anywhere, you can alert infected across town. Now that it knows your location, there's really no hope, because I mean this virus has spread all around this city. And Tess humbles Ellie in the nicest way possible, letting her know that even though she's immune to the infection, she can still get ripped up. The museum part of the episode, which was my favorite part of the episode, is really where this turns up, because now we're heading into a sort of area of infected where I would probably compare this to a sport area in the game. Instead of this place being sport though, it's decorated with bodies wrapped in tendrils everywhere, and the infected here aren't runners, they're clickers, meaning it's been infected long enough for some people to evolve into clickers at this point. And watching this trio move through the hall, again, so far between these 2 episodes, my favorite part by far. The tension and anxiety I get watching this episode reminded me of the same feelings that I got playing the game. Neil got in his bag with these different camera angles, the music build up to the silence and the loud crunch of Joel stepping on the glass and the ensuing chaos after. This is an example of a good adaptation. I say that because in the game, the use of sound is really how you kind of move around these clickers. You know, you'll get a glass bottle or a brick or something, and you'll have to throw it across the room so that you'll have a straightaway so you can get out of this spored area. Perfect, man, just perfect. I think what put the cherry on top of this episode for me was just how close to the game that this show is staying true to, even to this point. And the fact that Joel and Ellie are exactly what I thought they'd be. Only character I was kind of on the fence about, even going into this episode, was Tess. And I was waiting on this episode to decide how I feel about her character and whether it was treated accurately, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. Joel's character is still on point for where we are in the story. He's still that glass half empty empty on everything, still thinks Ellie's gonna turn even though she survived the night after being proven that she's infected, and doesn't believe Ellie when she tells them why the Fireflies need her. Now, he still struggles to believe her when she gets bit again, and it still doesn't get worse. His relationship with Tess, though, is similar in vibe but different in execution. The combinations of episode 1 and 2 reiterate that there's some sort of history between the two, but in the game, though, Tess and Joel seem like a better team than in the show. There's a few times where Tess saves Joel, and of course, as you playing as Joel in the game, you pave the way for progress. Here in the TV show, though, it seems more like a brains and brawn type of relationship where Tess is obviously the brains of the operation and is more hopeful. Joel, he's the brawn, of course, and has more so given up to the way of the outbreak and how it's changed life. I think you get that feeling in the show from the way that she confronts Joel about believing that something good can actually happen, much in the same way that Tess confronted Joel about his guilt with Sarah when it came to Ellie in the game.
I get it.
Joel's relationship with Ellie is accurate to this point as well. He already didn't believe her when she says she's not infected, but in his mind, he's on this rendezvous with Tess to smuggle this girl so that they can get what they need. And the only thing that kept Joel from getting rid of Ellie was Tess, both in the show and the game. Joel, through a majority of this episode, wanted nothing to do with Ellie. He didn't believe up until the point where he couldn't not believe. And even then, he was still combative with her in conversations. Again, this is very accurate to the game, but it's a little bit early because you don't see that in the Outskirts chapter as much, which is what this episode takes inspiration from. You see it in the next chapter, Billstown. Speaking of Ellie, though, she's still on par for where she's at in the game in regards to the story on the show, and is still consistent with how she was in the first episode as well. She clearly didn't understand the severity of the situation, and that's mainly because she hadn't been outside of the city since she was born. I mean, sure, she got a little taste of it when she snuck in the mall with her friend, which that's a whole nother topic, but that's nothing compared to this episode. I think Ramsey did a good job of conveying the innocence that Ellie has in this situation when she makes comments like she didn't ask for this, and when she asked Joel how it felt to unalive a Fedra guard at the end of the first episode. She's the exact same way in the game. The thought of killing real people is a concept that's kind of hard for her to come to terms with at first, and if this remains accurate to the game going forward, it'll be a recurring thing. Tess, just like in the game, was the one to give Ellie a chance, and here you can see Ellie start to become fond of her as she did in the game. She's the only one that believes, and in comparison to how Joel has treated her to this point in this episode, it would make sense why she would gravitate towards her and feel some sort of remorse when Tess reveals her infection. Tess also shows Ellie how the world outside the wall works, the history of why this place is in shambles, and in the show, she even explains how the infection works and what she needs to do to survive. As I said when I was talking about Joel's relationship with Ellie, the feeling is definitely mutual. Ellie doesn't like Joel either, and you can feel that in the game and the show. Now, as far as Tess goes, I do think that her character was done justice enough. I do think her character was taken in a different direction, and if you're a Tess stan, you may not be happy with the changes that they made, but because her part in the story is so short in general, she basically did what she needed to do. The Tess I met in the game was a capable straight shooter that even when Joel drops the ball, she's there to pick it back up. I mean, she straight walked down a clicker, and I don't know too many people in either of these games that have done that. She was also very forthcoming about how she felt about Joel, and this is part of the reason why I felt her death was more significant in the game, because we just met present day Joel, and from what I saw between the quarantine zone and the outskirt chapters, they seem like a well-meshed unit that just so happened to come across the only hope for mankind. In the show, though, it plays out a little bit differently. While she still seems to be the brains of the operation, she's pretty much a stormtrooper and comes off as the emotional anchor for Joel. She seems to know how he operates and can say what Joel wants to hear in order to prevent him from continuing to be a bad person. Speaking of being a bad person, she definitely acknowledges that about her and Joel, but she was able to balance out these moments where her maternal side kind of kicked in and she started to teach Ellie about what she needed to do to survive. On the podcast after the show, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann revealed that they wrote a whole backstory for Tess. Apparently she was married with a kid, both her husband and her kid turned. She killed her husband, but she couldn't find it in herself to unalive her son, so she locked him in the basement where presumably he became a clicker. Now the quality of acting was there, so I have no issue with Anna Torv's performance specifically between the first two episodes. I just think that she could have been given better material. And by material, I mean more chances to show that she can hold her own. I will say though, she was definitely able to do what needed to be done in regards to counteracting Joel's glass half empty with her glass half full mindset and hold him accountable for being stuck in the past over something that he couldn't change, and to be that fire that lit him up enough to start this journey to save mankind. All in all though, like I said, I am loving this show. I mean, I really don't have very many complaints. I'm gonna give this episode a 10 out of 10. Like I said, the only real issue that I had was with how Tess's character was treated, but because again, she's not that important to the story, I can let that slide. Especially when you consider how accurate to the game, the clickers, the runners, the quality of acting, the set design. I mean, this is exactly what I wanted as a Last of Us fan. Again, 10 out of 10, great debut for Neil Druckmann and great performances from all of the actors. With that being said, please be on the lookout for the next playthrough episode coming out this Saturday. If you want to see my episode 1 review, click here. And if you're interested in my game playthrough of The Last of Us Part 1, click here. I'll catch you on the next one.